As I was introduced, I'm an investigative reporter with the Palm Beach Post. They pay me to spend a lot of time on stories. I spend months on stories, and to much of my colleagues' consternation, sometimes who are turning out stories all the time. The idea for this one came from an article I read in Wired magazine. It was about this guy who was a geological statistician in Canada. He had basically uncovered a flaw in a scratch-off card. It was like a tic-tac-toe card, and he could tell if the card was a winner before scratching off the wax to like 80% reliability. Kind of an interesting concept, right? That some of these cards can have flaws in them. They're created by people, they can have flaws. My big question was, okay, this is really interesting. Could this be happening in Florida? And how would you go about answering that question? How would you know if somebody was winning or had cracked one of these scratch-off cards? My first thought was data would show it. Florida has amazing public records laws, and theoretically, you'd see one of these people winning way too often, right, on a particular game. And everybody else would be down here, and you'd see this one guy just winning like crazy. It would be an indicator that they had cracked one of these scratch-offs. So we requested all lottery prizes by the Florida Lottery since, we actually went back to '93. We kind of focused on the last decade. They track all wins above $600, nothing else below $600. The data was pretty amazing. It gave us the name and hometown of the winner, what they won, where the ticket was bought, and the date they cashed the ticket. It was actually a pretty amazing data set, and it gave us something pretty interesting. We did not find, so we ran the analysis on, okay, is anybody winning a scratch off more than anybody else? We didn't see anything that unusual. I mean, we saw some people winning a lot, but it was more like this as opposed to something like this. So we changed it up when we looked at, okay, who's winning the most often? Basically, who's going into a district office to cash in a lottery ticket the most often? And we found people winning way more than anyone else. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of times. These lottery games, a scratch-off worth 600 or more is only found in 1 in every 8,300 scratch-off tickets sold. Okay, so it's really rare. And some of these people were cashing in tickets multiple times a week from stores everywhere. And I grew up in Vegas. The Vegas part of me said, okay, if this was a casino, they would take you into a back room where they don't have cameras and, figure out how you're trying to win so often. And then they'd throw you out, right? But nevertheless, we saw this over the years. I mean, you'd see people winning over years at these kinds of rates. So clearly, if something was amiss, the Florida Lottery wasn't catching it. So when we ran the analysis, this is what the top winners looked like. This guy, Lewis Johnson, he was from Pompano Beach, 252 wins, $719,000. And you go down the list, Jackie Barnes from Riviera, which is very close to the paper, Jose Mario Campos Perez, and these two people. This is kind of interesting. You don't normally see, there are probably not a lot of Thackers in Gainesville. Did a little bit of Googling, found out, oh, whoa, these people actually own a store. They own a place that sells lottery tickets. Of course, made me a little suspicious. So I started looking at, okay, how would you appear as a frequent winner? Theoretically, you could spend a ton of money and win. You could get lucky doing this, right? You could be rich, spend a lot of money, buy a lot of tickets, potentially lose some money, but there are a lot of degenerate gamblers out there. Florida is the #2 lottery by revenue in North America. They sell about $5 billion in lottery tickets. It's actually bigger than California, surprisingly. But you could have somebody who had cracked the lottery, who had, like the guy in Canada, or they could be up to something illegal. But first, I needed to figure out, okay, or could these people just be lucky? And I started calling around to statisticians and mathematicians because I'm not an expert on any of this. And I had called MIT. They're too busy for that. I had called a guy in Canada, a mathematician at University of Ontario. He said, yeah, I can help you with a couple of these, but I'm going to charge a lot of money for the rest. So I'm like, yeah, we're kind of on a tight budget. I called Philip, or actually I called somebody at Berkeley. Philip said, yeah, this sounds really interesting. I can help out when I'm not flying around the world monitoring elections and stuff. So then I looked for anybody who had dealt with the media on lottery stuff, and that's where I found Skip Garibaldi, who partnered up with Philip on this and was a huge help. So I'll turn it over to them now. They can explain the math, because I can't. So.
Thanks for inviting me here in the generous introduction. And I want to especially thank Skip for letting me ride on his coattails on this, because he's really done by far the most work on the problem. So this is a summary of Lewis Johnson's wins. You can see that he won the Play 4 game, which involves picking a 4-digit number. So you have a 1 in 10,000 chance of getting it right. He's won that 166 times. And you might imagine that to get a 1 in 10,000 thing happening 166 times is a little bit unusual. He's won 83 scratchers, 3 of the Lotto Fantasy 5 Mega Money, a total of 252 wins. The total amount of money is not huge. This isn't big compared to the jackpot. It's not big compared to Powerball or something like that. It's the number of wins that's remarkable rather than the total amount of money. So how do you figure out whether this is unlikely? How do you make sense of it? So a Powerball ticket has a 1 in 175 million chance of winning the jackpot. You can't just say that because you got the jackpot you must have cheated, even though there's a really microscopic chance that you won. People do win the jackpot without buying 175 million tickets. The point is the chance that somebody wins is really high. The chance that you win is really small unless you buy a gazillion tickets, like some of the cartels that have bought one of every possible ticket in some of these contests. So how do we think about this? How do we figure out how likely it is that somebody could have won this many times on a human scale? So one of the fundamental results in probability theory is the law of large numbers, which says if you repeat a random trial over and over and over again, the chance that the fraction of the time that the event occurs differs from the probability that the event occurs by very much, gets smaller and smaller and smaller the more times you try. So the probability that the theoretical rate differs from the true rate by much gets really, really small if you have a large number of trials. So if you have something that has only a 1 in 10,000 chance of happening, in the long run, if you play this game over and over and over again, you should only win about 1 in 10,000 times. And so you figure if you've got to put in $10,000 to have a reasonable chance of winning once, you ought to lose a whole lot of money in order to end up having won as many times as he did. So it feels like these people who are winning very, very frequently in games that have only a small probability of winning must have invested an enormous amount of money if they're playing honestly. So how do we figure out what's an absurd number of times to win? So what if you just have a gambling problem and you're going to throw all of your income, all of your assets into buying lottery tickets? What would happen? Well, suppose you start with $151,000. That number is almost pulled out of a hat. That's the median home price in Florida right now. So there's certainly gamblers who've lost their homes because of their habits. So let's imagine that here I am. I'm willing to bet the house. How many times should I expect to win a big prize if I were willing to invest $151,000? Well, if I wanted to win as often as possible, I'd play the game that has the biggest chance of winning. My goal is simply to win rather than to maximize the amount of money that I get, but simply maximize the number of times I win. I'd pick the thing that has the biggest probability of paying off something. So for the game that has the largest probability of winning a prize of $600 or more, which would give them a record that we would see, you would actually expect that if they bet $151,000, you'd expect them to win 174. 174 is still quite a bit less than 250 some odd, but it still gives you an idea that the mere number is not all that surprising. We're going to have to do a closer analysis to figure out whether this number of wins is hugely shocking for someone who's willing to lose everything in the process of gambling. So what are we going to do? We want to do a little bit more mathematics, do things a little bit carefully. So how do you set this up as math? Well, in reality, people who wager on these games tend to wager on more than one game that have different odds. But let's, for simplicity, just get started. Let's imagine that someone is just playing that straight pick 4, so they have a 1 in 10,000 chance of winning over and over and over again. And we're going to look at what happens if you buy T tickets for this game. what's the chance that you win at least n times? So we're going to denote that with this d of t, n, and p. So it's the probability that in t random trials with probability little p of success, you win at least n times. So that's a binomial probability distribution problem. These are IID Bernoulli trials. Those of you who have taken introductory statistics would know how to calculate that. All right, so that's something we can do, at least in the simple case. But how do we decide on a threshold for surprisingness? At what point do you come to the conclusion that no reasonable amount of luck could account for someone's apparent success at the game on the assumption that they're honest? So again, very often somebody wins in Powerball, right? I don't know if it's the majority of the time, but I think it's roughly about a third of the time Powerball prize gets claimed. So people do win in things that have odds of 1 in 175 million, even though 1 in 175 million is pretty lucky. So instead, what we're going to look at is what if everybody in Florida played this way? What if everybody in Florida bet the house? What's the chance? We want to look at, we're going to say something is surprising if even then the chance that one or more of them won this much would be microscopically small. Okay, so all right, so why do we care about everyone? What's the math behind that? Well, the chance that somebody wins that many times is much larger than the chance any particular person wins. And what we're doing is we're looking at the successes. We're looking at these people who are on the list. We're looking at that after the fact rather than picking them first, looking at their playing history and seeing how often they win. So imagine if you toss a fair coin 20 times, the chance that you get 20 heads is about 1 in a million. If everybody in Florida were to toss a fair coin 20 times, there's about 19 million people in Florida, the chance that at least one of them would get 20 heads in a row it's nearly certain, right? So what we'd like to do is set some threshold so that even if everyone in Florida were doing this, the probability that any of them would succeed in winning this often would be on the order of 1 in a million. I'll just get.
All right, so this is a math talk, so even though it's a public lecture, there's lots of non-mathematicians here. There's lots of mathematicians here also. So here's our math slide. So Philip pointed out that if the gambler is only playing a particular single game, it's easy to calculate various probabilities involved. But here we've got lots of different games going on. Lewis Johnson, not only did he get a lot of Play 4 prizes, but he played something like 50 different scratcher games. So we want to, and these all have different probabilities and different rates of payout. So we want to treat all these differently. And so we set it up as a bunch of different games. We know the price of every ticket. We know the probability of winning a recorded prize, a $600+ prize on that ticket. And we do, how many times we observe the gambler winning that game. And so we just turn it all into an optimization problem. What's the least amount the gambler could have spent in order to get the probability of winning so many times in each of these games, at least this tiny threshold, which is the one that Philip talked about. The probability is calculated so that if everyone in Florida bet this amount of money, this minimum cost here, this is the total cost spent, the cost per ticket times the number of tickets in each game played. What is the minimum amount they could have spent? So that the total probability that anyone in Florida, if everyone is spending that amount of money on lottery tickets in the optimal way, would still be less than 1 in a million. So it's giving a tremendous amount away to the gamblers. And so it is an optimization problem that you can solve on your computer. Well, for those of you who have had multivariable calculus, you know you can do this in principle using Lagrange multipliers. But in fact, you can't because this function right here is a regularized beta function. So you can't solve for t in closed form in your Lagrange multiplier solution. So you're going to need to use a computer to do it. Now, in principle, any software package like Mathematica or MATLAB will do it. In fact, Mathematica won't do it for reasons that I'm not entirely sure of. Maybe the gradient here is too small in magnitude. I'm not exactly sure what the story is. MATLAB will do it if you goose the parameters a little bit. For the people who are familiar with the difference between pure math and scientific computing, I should mention that, of course, the computer just finds a local minimum, right? So a problem here, to translate it for the non-mathematicians, this is find the value of t which minimizes this expression. So you should imagine a topographic map or a mountain range, and you're asking for the bottom of the deepest valley. But of course, the computer can't find that. The computer can only find the bottom of a valley. It doesn't know if it's the deepest valley. So you might ask, how do we know that we found the bottom of the deepest valley? And the answer is, well, it's OK because the technical words are the following. This is a convex function of t. So as many of you know from reading Boyd and Vanderburg's book, a convex function on a convex set, a local minimum is a global minimum. So it would be sufficient to just verify that this feasible set here is actually convex. And so in order to make that claim, it's sufficient to know that all of the terms in this product here is a log concave function. Now, as it turns out, when we started looking into this problem, we were not able to find that. And so we then were discussing with some experts, and one of them produced for us a proof that this is actually log concave. And we're like, awesome, we had to get a new theorem in order to address this question that Lawrence asked us about the lottery. We were very excited. And then the specialist, Dimitri, told us that, in fact, then he discovered it was in a paper from the 90s. So that's a theorem from the 1990s, it turns out. But anyway, so it's a convex function on a convex feasible set, so a local minimum is a global minimum. And its numerical solution is actually the bottom of the deepest valley, as we wanted to find. So that's the math slide, and now we can go back to talking about less technical things. So we applied that to all the gamblers. And so here's what we found. So it's the same slide as before, except for I've unified Nita and Amit Thacker since our husband and wife team. And in California, of course, it's a community property state. Income taxes. The franchise tax board would definitely unify these two income numbers, right? All right, so this is the minimum number that was produced by that optimization problem. And so I could just say, well, that's a lot of money for someone who operates a convenience store. I think we can all agree. But for the skeptics in the audience, if I were you, I might think 3 of these 4 numbers are in the $2 to $3 million range. That looks a little suspicious. And let me say, meaning you might doubt what we did up here. And that's a very legitimate objection. You see, when I was doing the optimization problem, we didn't include all of the games that these people won, because every time you want to include the results, the number of wins for a particular game, I have to calculate some probabilities and then add it into the MATLAB file. I'm a little rusty with MATLAB, so it's kind of a little tiresome process. And so I just added in enough games to get this. As you add in more games, the estimated minimum spending level gets bigger and bigger. So if you leave off games, you're just giving away things in favor of the gambler, right? Making them look more legitimate, lowering this number. So I only added in enough games until this number got big enough that we were like, yeah, that's suspicious. So somewhere in the $2 to $3 million range, I was like, okay, I can stop, right? Okay, because I got a day job too, right? So, all right, so that's why it's these numbers. Some of the numbers might actually be bigger if I bothered to include all the games and so on. I want to explain that. All right, so here's an interesting thing. The table of top winners, we actually investigated 11 people who claimed those prizes. Of course, 2 of those are the couple, the Thackers, so really it was 10 people who claimed prizes. And of those 10, 2 of them appear to be legitimate. Those weren't on the previous table of frequent gamblers. Their names were not mentioned in the newspaper article that Lawrence published. And so I'm not going to mention them here. But the interesting fact is what the counterexample that Philip mentioned, the sanity check, is serious. There are 2 people who won a lot of prizes that appear to be legitimate gamblers. So specifically, there's a guy from Hollywood, Florida, who claimed 578 Play 4 prizes. This is the prize where you guess a 4-digit number, and therefore you have a 1 in 10,000 chance of winning, and if you win, you get $5,000. So that's a lot of prizes. No, that's more than twice as many claimed prizes as Lewis Johnson, who we talked about before. So why does this guy seem to be legitimate, and the other gamblers, we think, merit further investigation? So let me explain. The reason is that Play 4, the game that this man played, is a different nature than the other games. So, as I explained, you're going to guess a 4-digit number. If you get it right, a 1 in $10,000 chance, you win the prize. But you get to pick, in Play 4, which in California is called Daily 4, you get to pick the amount you want to wager. So if you bet $1, you get $5,000 if you win. But you could bet $100, in which case you'd win $500,000 if your number comes up. So consequently, so what does this have to do with the man from Hollywood? Well, those are recorded in an interesting way. The $1 bet appears once in our list, and the $100 bet appears 100 times. So the interesting thing that distinguishes it from scratcher tickets, if I see 2 scratcher prizes claimed, those can be treated as independent events when you're calculating probabilities. But if I see 2 Play 4 prizes claimed, how do I know if they're independent events? That person might have bet $2 on that particular drawing, and that changes the probability calculation. And that's something we have to be careful about. And it's very hard. We don't have any way to determine from this list of winners that Lawrence obtained at the beginning whether this guy was betting on different numbers at different times or a lot of money on a single number at a single drawing. So, in fact, sensitive to this question, Lawrence, in his paper, paid the Florida lottery operators to pull copies of this guy's actual winning tickets. They got all the winning tickets stored in bankers' boxes in some warehouse somewhere. So they paid someone to actually go and look through these boxes and pull copies of the winning tickets. And with that, we were able to estimate that we believe that this guy bet about $200 and won that bet on 2 separate occasions. Another occasion, he won a $100 bet on a single number. And then a couple other times, he won a single $1 bets on a single number. So rerunning the same optimization problem from before with this alternative interpretation, as opposed to 578 1 in 10,000 chances, he's betting $200 sometimes, $100 other times. We came up with a probability about 1 in 625 that he could have broken even with those bets. Okay, well, that's 1 in 625 is still pretty nice. That's still pretty lucky, but at least it's plausible that that guy was a legitimate gambler. But that's all the mathematics can say, and at this point we had to turn it back over to Lawrence, who had to actually go out and talk to these gamblers. And hopefully not get shot.
Hopefully. There's still plenty of time left. Yeah, so obviously we saw that some of these people would be losing a ton of money. I mean, we're talking losing millions of dollars here. My editors and I thought, okay, this is definitely something weird going on. How could they be doing it? Okay. And it turns out that these kinds of frequent winners are not unique to Florida. They've actually been found in other places. And some of them are just legitimate gamblers who, I mean, the math that backed this up, these people could very well be rich, or they could be buying a lot of tickets and losing money, basically. Some of them could be rich. We also found that some frequent winners were store clerks and owners who, basically, if you see this, there's a barcode here and a little digit numbers there. We found that some clerks will take a pin, P-I-N, and just kind of scratch just enough of the wax off so that they can scan it in the machine, scan this little code in the machine, and see if it's a winner, without scratching anything else off, of course. So, and then if it's not a winner, they'll just put it back in the roll, and the next person will come by and buy it. Of course, they won't be looking for this. But there are a number of security mechanisms that have been in place to prevent this from happening. I mean, this was a big deal like in the 90s and the early 2000s. And they've also got like better barcodes now. I mean, that's obviously a 2D code. You need to scratch off quite a bit to uncover it. Another option. So when we did our analysis, we started looking into these people. We found 6 of the top 10 were store clerks or store owners. Okay, places that sold lottery tickets. Well, in California actually, and in Canada, they discovered that a lot of their frequent winners were store clerks and owners too, and that they were coming by these tickets illegally. Basically, they would steal them from customers. So if you look at heavy lottery players, they'll go in any day, or every day, some of them, and go in and buy like 6 or 10 or 20 of the same or different games. And they might come back the next day and say, hey, store clerk, will you scan these for me? A lot of outlets that sell lottery tickets do not have self-scanning machines. Okay, you can't go up and scan them yourself. Instead, the clerk does it. And this is really, a lot of these games are confusing. Skip was confused by a game. He thought one wasn't a winner, and it was a winner, right? I actually went in once, because I played a lot. I had to buy a lot of these games. Some of them on the company's dime, but and test it out and see. And I actually had
which is which, right?
Yeah, exactly. I had, at one occasion, I had a ticket that I thought was a winner, like a $2 winner or something. And I actually handed it to the clerk, and the clerk took it, scanned it, said, oh, I'm sorry, not a winner. I'm like, whoa, that's really easy to do, because you kind of inherently believe you're not going to win. Certainly not going to win any big amount. So these other lotteries found that these people were actually, these frequent winners were just doing this on a regular basis. A lot of people come in, ask to have their tickets scanned, and the clerk will say, if he's honest, he'll say, hey, you got a $5,000 winner, congratulations, I can't cash it. In Florida, They can only cash tickets worth $600 or less. You need to go to a district office to cash it. That's if they're honest. If they're dishonest, they of course say, oh, sorry, no, not a winner, toss it aside. Or they'll say, oh, it's a $50 winner, here's your $50, when it's really, it was worth $5,000. Ticket aggregation. So when the person goes in and hands their ticket to a store clerk to see if it's a winner, the store clerk, instead of stealing it or telling them, say they're honest, okay, and they say, you got a $5,000 winner here. The person on the other side of the counter, the winner, can have a problem if they owe back taxes, child support, a lot of these debts to the state. So the Florida Lottery, like most lotteries, if you go in with a big winner, they're going to check and see first, before they pay you, whether or not you owe child support or back taxes and stuff. And they'll take that out of your winnings. So if you owe $5,000 of child support, you have a $5,000 winner, you will see none of that. So this provides an incentive for people to have somebody else cash in their ticket, right? And in fact, numerous other states have seen that these frequent winners are actually people who take a cut out of this. They will take a winning ticket, they'll say, you got a $5,000 winner, I'll give you $2,500 cash, okay? And the person is like, hey, $2,500 is better than nothing, and they'll make that deal. And that person, the store clerk or whoever, will go to the district office and cash it in, and they're doing this all the time. And that's how you see them rack up wins. They're not actually winning, they're just cashing in the tickets. There's another more nefarious side to this. As opposed to people wanting to avoid taxes, actually in Florida, 6 other states, and multiple continents, law enforcement has seen that some of these top winners are actually criminals, drug dealers, and others who are trying to launder money through the lottery. So in Florida, for example, there was an example of a guy who was a drug dealer in Miami. And what's a drug dealer's biggest problem? Too much dirty money. If you start spending it around, police notice. Obviously, you don't have a legitimate job. And so they can seize everything you've got. So they want a legitimate way to claim income. So they'll go to these store clerks and store owners and say, hey, look, if somebody comes in with like a $5,000 winner, tell them I'll pay $5,000 straight cash for it. And of course, the drug dealer is going to take a loss. I mean, some percentage of the winnings is going to be claimed as income and going to come out of taxes. But nevertheless, if you can launder money at like a 75% rate, that's really, really good. And so we found that some of these people were criminals, using the lottery to launder money. So we went out and started talking to these people. Vipul Shukla was one of the top winners, 140 wins, $300,000. A lot of these people the data showed a number of red flags, things that beyond the spending was very suspicious. One, if you work at a lottery outlet, okay, that's a little bit suspicious. It leaves you open to some of these other scams, like stealing tickets or cashing in tickets for other people. He went to 58 different stores. I'll show you a map in a slide or two of where you see some of these people winning. I mean, they're winning all over multiple counties. It's really amazing. They'd have to be just on the road all the time, buying tons of tickets. It made no sense. You can go to your corner store and buy every lottery game you want. Also, something else was really weird. You see these people who would have no wins for 15 years, and all of a sudden they start winning once a week or once every 2 weeks, or even more frequently than that. So I interviewed this guy at his home. He was not understandably thrilled to see me. He told me that after a little bit of a contentious interview, that he was actually cashing in tickets for people. He wouldn't tell me how he was doing this or how the scam worked. I got the door slammed in my face after his wife came to the door after that. So that's one of the winners. Lewis Johnson, if you recall, was our #1 guy. He had 252 wins, $700,000 or so. This is what a portion of his wins look like. I mean, so he's got wins from as far south as South Miami, all the way up to Martin County, which is like, a few 100 or 200 miles away. It really made no sense. And this is just the area of Pompano Beach, right here. His home is right about in here, okay? And he goes to a store here all the time, a few of them. But look at this. I mean, there's no reason why you'd be going to all these stores and winning. So I interviewed Lewis Johnson. He rents a $70,000 home in Pompano. And he sits on his porch all the time. He's 68 years old. He has a beat-up pickup truck sitting in the lawn. He does not look like a guy who's won $700,000. Okay, so I knock on the door. He comes to the door. He said, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm Lawrence Mower with the Palm Beach Post. I want to talk to you because you're the luckiest lottery winner in Florida." And he looks at me and he goes, "Lottery? I've never won the lottery." Okay, we did a lot of work to verify that these are the right people. We couldn't find any other Lewis Johnson in Pompano Beach except for his son, who was in prison for a lot of these wins, so you can kind of rule him out. But he said that somebody was cashing in tickets in his name, basically had stolen his ID and was going to a district office, and who knows, maybe the person looked like him, I don't know. But he said that somebody else was cashing in tickets in his name. We'll get back to him in a minute. Jose Mario Campos Perez, this is really where the math came in handy. Jose Mario Campos Perez was a store clerk in Miami. He had recently sold his store at the time we did this investigation. Of course, one of the easiest ways to tell if they're lying or not is to ask them, how much do you think you spent on lottery tickets? Because we knew how much, at a bare minimum, they'd had to spend. Skip's and Phillips' analysis showed he'd win $2.4 million. He'd have to spend $2.4 million. When I asked him how much he spent, he said, "Oh, just $10 to $15 a day." Well, that's about $53,000, which is quite a bit off. And I said, "Well, you'd have to be spending millions." He kind of laughed and said, no, that's not possible. It kind of speaks for itself. The Thackers were that Gainesville couple. They've managed multiple stores in the Gainesville area. That's where University of Florida is. It's kind of a small podunk town. When I interviewed them, they said they'd actually discovered a loophole in a scratch-off game, or in scratch-offs, where basically they said they got data from the lottery that for every roll of tickets they had, if you only had a few tickets left in that roll to be sold, and 90% of the winnings had not been paid out for that roll, then obviously there's a big winner left. And they would just buy up all the big winners, or all the remaining tickets. And they said that it would work 90% of the time. They'd get a big winner in there. Well, this data does not actually exist. The lottery doesn't know where the winners are on these scratch-off cards. The game makers actually do, but they don't know where the cards are distributed. So there's kind of a double layer there. These guys, there's no way it's nonsense. There's no way they could have discovered this loophole. They said they estimated $10,000 to $20,000 in profit each year. No, obviously not true. They would have lost probably $243,000, or give or take a little bit each year. It's not possible. And we would run the financials on these people. We'd look at their backgrounds. A lot of them owned pretty nice homes and stuff. It's not indicative. They didn't file for bankruptcy, claiming a ton of losses on anything. I mean, there's no way. So we published the story about a month ago. We had maps of where these people had won and all this stuff. I should say, when I talked to the lottery secretary about this, she said, well, these people could just be getting lucky. They really, like most people, did not understand the math at all. Even though we said they could not really be getting lucky, short of spending millions and losing millions. On the first day, the day after the story ran, legislators were calling for additional reforms, or additional oversight over the lottery. There's really the security procedures that are lax. That was another part of our investigation, was that they're not doing things that California does, for example, to limit this kind of fraud. They were really lax on a lot of this stuff. On the second day after our story ran, the lottery actually seized terminals at Lewis Johnson's top stores. This is the guy who said that he'd never won again. This is actually a guy, this is our photo of a lottery employee taking out a machine at one of these stores. On the third day of the story, they basically said that they were going to adopt different security different measures themselves that other states do. So it's pretty interesting. And they actually went to Lewis Johnson's house to interview him. They might not believe his story, that he'd never won. We'll see. We're going to have additional stories that might address that in the future. So yeah, I mean, we had the math was critical to our story, because the basic question was, if we ran the story without the math, people could say, well, they just could be getting lucky, and the math was critical to determining that they really could not be getting lucky. So, and if you got any other questions, math-related questions, especially, ask them. So.
Question. On these pre-printed lotto forms, I'm assuming that, I've never seen this Florida ticket, but I'm assuming you have 4 columns with numbers 0 through 9 on each one or something, and you scratch off the numbers. Does the state of Florida print all 10,000 versions of that, or would it be possible for some, if they got lazy, to like print only 500 different combinations of cards, if somebody could buy those, figure that out, and then scratch off a number and then go in and say, okay, I'm reducing my odds from 1 in 10,000 to maybe 1 in 100 or something like that.
So,
or do they print all 10,000?
Well, actually, I think there's some confusion about the way the game works. Okay. So with Play 4 in Florida or Daily 4 here, the numbers are, the slip looks like a Mega Millions slip, where it's like a Scantron form with 4 columns of 9 numbers, and you fill in the numbers you want, and you hand it to the clerk, and they print out a slip for you with a barcode on the bottom. And then in Florida, twice a day, they draw the numbers.
It's a bouncing ball game, yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a scratcher.
That's right. No. Right.
Well, some are. Yeah, some are.
But the Play 4 game is not a scratcher game. And actually, that was part of the reason that we were so interested in doing the mathematics behind it, because all of the things that the clerks can do to game the scratcher games, like the pin scratching and so on, they can't do with the Play 4. And so that made our analysis much more interesting from our perspective.
It's funny, the Play 4 thing, just as a quick side note, so it's a bouncing ball game. Other states actually use computers to determine the random numbers. And of course, I mean, I didn't actually know this, but when I was calling around lottery security experts, they said, oh man, is it a computer-based version? Because kind of people are waiting for people to crack the pattern for these computers. Because of course, computers can't produce truly random numbers. But anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. But.
Do you have any hypotheses to what's going on here? I mean, you said
yeah.
That it's highly unlikely that what they say is true, but then with some degree of certainty, what do you think is going on? That's my first probability problem.
Yeah, so it's a little difficult to answer that because we don't want to slander or libel anyone. Of course. Yeah. It's very likely that it could be some combination of things. Some of these people, who knows? I mean, some of these people very well could be cashing in tickets or not, or stealing tickets. You would think that the number of tickets stolen, though, would kind of rule that out. I mean, you'd have to steal a lot of tickets to get 200 winning tickets. That's a lot. People don't appreciate how rare these winning tickets are. I mean, it's something like, 1 in 30,000 online games, like the Play 4 and the other bouncing ball type games, like only 1 in every 39,000 tickets, 10,000 tickets sold, is actually a $600 winner or more. I mean, it's really rare. And for scratch-offs, it's like 1 in 8,300 or something like that. So, I can't say for certain what's going on, but the lottery is investigating it, and so.
Well, actually, this is a good opportunity for a little PSA. So in California, so this thing about clerks stealing tickets, where you go to the clerk and you ask them if it's a winner or not, and the clerk just pockets it and says it's a loser. This thing has been a widespread problem, and if you Google for news stories about this, you can find lots of them. But in California, it's very easy to defend against this because there are self-service ticket machines that just scan them yourself, so you can see if it's a winner or not and know for yourself. And in particular, many of, at least the scratcher vending machines that I've seen recently, they all have this scanning feature. And those are so you can just help yourself. So that's your little PSA.
Yeah, and that's actually, I cited California a lot. They have a lot of security measures to prevent this that Florida does not have.
And they're publicizing the prosecutions, which wasn't happening in Florida either.
Yeah.
Florida was doing its own, lottery entity was doing its own policing, and it wasn't advertising what it was doing, so there was a lot of deterrent effect.
Yeah.
Husband and wife clerks, are they going to get in trouble?
I don't know. They're investigating it. We're looking at some stuff on our own for various follow-ups. We've gotten tips and stuff afterward that we're looking into. So I don't know, maybe not. One thing we're going to do is obviously pull the winner, a list of winners, and see if they've kept winning after our stories ran. I mean, if they were legitimately winning, they'd keep winning and keep playing, right? I mean, No, not the people in Gainesville.
They have to save up for their legal defense, right? They have to,
Exactly, that's right.
No, they did not. The lottery's not taken any action against them. They've only taken action against 3 stores in Pompano Beach where Louis Johnson's basically places where Lewis Johnson was winning his tickets. So
What basis?
it's funny, they've not said. They've said that they have seized the machines because the law has been broken. They've not said what. We've made numerous requests to them and through records and in other ways to say, okay, you're accusing them of a crime, but you haven't arrested anyone. You know. So I don't know. It's still pretty early in the process. So we'll see what they come up with because they have access to information that we don't have, like Social Security numbers for winners. We don't have any of that stuff, you know, that other places do. There was a guy in the back. Yeah.
You were saying there's no reason people go to multiple locations to buy tickets, but there is. If you read the papers, some people travel thousands of miles to go to a location that's had a major winning ticket, and therefore I think there is some reason for people to go to some locations and travel a bit to do that, based on my breath.
No, absolutely, and that is something that is true. I mean, after you do see a small spike in sales at stores because they publicize, oh, you won a $30 million jackpot was sold from here. And you do see sales go up. And we had pulled sales figures on a lot of these stores, but we didn't notice anything unusual in that respect. And when you look at the number of stores, I mean, these are almost, I think, 8 of the top 10, they'd gotten tickets from 30 or more stores. And the top one was they had tickets from like 69 different stores, you know, across multiple counties. I mean, you could be doing that, but you'd be working a lot at doing it. I mean, you get to spend, you know, a lot of time and money doing that. No, there isn't. It's a total myth. I mean, these games are not, you know, they are random. You know, you're not, there's no one store that's luckier than another. So, yeah. So, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, are other states keeping this kind of records, or is it just Florida?
Well, that's a good question.
Well, actually, Lawrence provided us with a list of, so many states have public records laws. If you Google the right thing, you can find an aggregated list which for every state says what you can, in theory, obtain from the state as public records. So what Lawrence provided me with a list for Georgia, since my other job is at Emory University in Atlanta. And they, unfortunately, only told us winners of $5,000 prizes and more, which is too bad because then you don't see the signal from the scratcher prizes won, which are mostly like in the $1,000 price range. But nonetheless, even already in the Georgia data, we could see some people that merited investigation. So, but that, you know, there's no analog of Lawrence there who's doing that shoe leather part, which is a crucial portion of the investigation. And I'm sure there's other states where there's similar phenomenon happening that could be turned up.
Yeah, Massachusetts, their Inspector General looked at, so they did the same analysis in 2003 or something. It's available online. But they found that, yeah, these frequent winners were winning at absurd rates. But for the most part, these lotteries are government run. In Florida, at least, a lot of the people who work at the lotteries are political appointees. You know, you don't have a lot of, I mean, the lotteries really care if people are buying tickets because their primary function is usually to turn over the money to education or roads or, you know, whatever kind of purpose. They really care about who's, are they selling tickets or not? Not necessarily who's winning all of them. You know? So some states are very vigilant, others are not.
So I want to mention, by the way, that when we've given this talk before, some people have objected that, like, why are you so excited about the possibility that some people might go to jail? Because it seems like they're just playing the lottery, you know. And I just want to say that, you know, these people are really doing something that hurts other citizens, right? If a clerk is stealing tickets, then that gambler who presented their winning ticket, they are getting hurt, right? They lost their winning ticket. If someone's doing ticket aggregation, then they are helping other people avoid paying child support. And if they're money laundering, well, they're using a government-provided service, the lottery, to assist in criminal activity. So in all three of these cases, other citizens should care and should be pro law enforcement.
How long did all of this take, like from start to finish? When you first had the idea?
Well, when we first had the idea, I mean, it was, good grief, actually about a year, but it took a long time to negotiate the data itself. You know, the data we originally got was sloppy. It was, you know, it had a lot of problems with it. So, what's that?
Contacted me roughly in November, was that
Yeah,
right?
November. That's when so it was about, what, 6 months? Yeah. 6 to 8 months probably of full-time work on this. Yeah, and you guys spent how many hours? I don't know, a ton of time. But yeah, it was about 6 months, and that's a big investment for newspapers today. And you know, I was fortunate enough that the Post let us do it.
Two related questions. So you gave us good reasons why it should be illegal to sell a winning ticket to somebody else. One question, is it illegal? And the other question is, so there is a record, a public record of who cashed the card. But is there a record when the ticket is sold? So that, and if not, I mean, maybe I have 3 questions.
Yeah. So
it's a crime when you sell. If you sell a winning in Florida, it's a crime if you sell a winning ticket or if you buy a winning ticket from someone else. Both people involved in that transaction are committing a first-degree misdemeanor. Is that the technical term? And the law is written in such a way that you can't get around it by like selling an interest in it or something like this. Well, when you go buy a scratcher at a store, right? It's just a cash transaction. It's like buying a bag of M&Ms. There's no record of who did that.
It's funny because in some cases there are, like, so if you get a winning ticket or any kind of ticket, you're supposed to sign the back of it, and the lottery, obviously if you're going to turn it over to someone else, they can't cash in that ticket in your signature. So you'll see that them, I actually went to the lottery's office. I saw, where they actually do some really sophisticated analysis of the back of these tickets where people have signed them. They've found that some of these tickets they use whiteout, of course. They can uncover that and figure out who the original signer was. And it's pretty sophisticated stuff, actually. So in those cases, you can tell who the original winner was, but you can't tell who bought the ticket. And when I actually asked the lottery about this whole phenomenon about cashing in tickets for someone else, they said that prosecutors in some states, or in some counties in Florida, have stopped cooperating with, or have said, you know what, I don't care if somebody signs over their ticket to someone else. I'm not going to waste my time prosecuting this case. And we got bigger fish to fry. So the lottery stopped enforcing it, only when some people thought that they were being defrauded or something. But
I have a very technical question for you. On the math slide, what was the epsilon for your result?
Million divided by the population of Florida. What was Bonferroni about?
So you had said there's a high probability of somebody winning, but just not like a specific person. So I was wondering if there's a way, if you even had the ability to see, if people were getting lucky, there should have been more wins than like the total number of tickets sold in the whole lottery. So like, if there's 252 wins for this guy, would there have been enough tickets sold that 252 individual people could have won in that span?
I don't think there was any evidence that there are more wins of a given magnitude than one would expect. The question is about how those wins are distributed across individuals, and they're shockingly concentrated in a few hands.
So we didn't actually investigate this question. Are there an odd number of wins? Because we expect that if somehow there are more prizes claimed than the Florida lottery expected to be claimed, pretty sure they'd investigate that, right? Because I mean, anything that affects their bottom line is going to matter a lot, right? There's still a.
So, from my perspective as a statistician, one of the really nice features of this particular problem is that the probabilities are real. The probabilities are coming from the lottery itself, right? There really is a random drawing of some sort. Very often you get calls from the media saying, gee, this family just had children born on 9/9/09, 10/10/10, and 11/11/11. What's the chance of that? And it's like, there is no answer to that. You have to make up a probability model and to say, is this surprising or is it not? But the probability isn't real, it's made up. In this case, probability is really coming from the lottery. It's very clean, it's very nice.
Just a final thing, you sort of seem apologetic as to the fact that your calculations are causing trouble for some people, but in fact, you're reverting to the very origins of probability theory, calculating, gambling. In some way, you're doing the purest science there is. And that should be your defense.
It's the origin of probability theory, right? Gambling.
Yeah, and some of I should note that some of these people, may face hardship or not. We weren't saying that these people are doing anything illegal per se. We're just saying that it's a little weird. Somebody should probably look into it. And we consulted with other lottery security experts who kind of said, "Oh, this is really weird. This is." So it definitely merits further investigation. So by the lottery. So.
Well, if there's no more questions. Before we break, I want to invite you all to a reception IPAM, which is just down the way, you can follow. If you don't know the way there, you can follow others who do. And I want to thank the speakers very much. Thank you.
Thank you.